What I discuss here is my own theory, so just take what rings true for you. It's commonly believed that the feminine intern, or FI, often referred to as the divine feminine, leads the twin flame journey. And I do believe there is some truth to this, but I don't believe it's as thought to be with most in the twin flame community. I do believe that the FI does lead with such things as healing, opening more to their intuition, consciously focusing on becoming more spiritually aware because they are the more spiritually focused twin. But what's going on with the masculine intern, or MI as I'll refer to them? Many people believe they're not a part of this, that they just serve as a catalyst and maybe show up for reunions to keep you moving forward, the proverbial carrot on the stick. But I believe they're in this all the way, just that they may have different experiences and different roles. So, very early in my spiritual journey, I was led to understand that as a shared soul, this is not a one sided experience. I think having an understanding of what the typical experiences and roles are for each person, and of course, each journey is unique, but there are definitely some commonalities. But understanding how the other person affects you can help you embrace your journey rather than cause you to put up resistance. What I was shown is that the FI leads the spiritual growth, whereas the MI leads the physical growth of the journey, and they each reflect each other. And I go into more detail about this in my Am I in Divine Energy video. Like, these could be seen as the energy of the growth for each. This is representing the spiritual growth that the FI goes through, the focus and intention they give, but also just the experiences they're guided through as part of the divine plan. And this represents the physical growth that MI goes through. They have more focus and guidance with worldly or 3D balancing, but it's the energy that mirrors each other. Then there's the physical growth the FI experiences, and the spiritual that the MI experiences, and that energy reflects. But the physical growth for the feminine will likely not be as intense or as much as what the masculine goes through, and the spiritual growth the masculine experiences will likely not be as intense or as much as what the feminine goes through. What we each bring creates our unique balance with our shared soul. And that's actually paramount to union, but it's hard to wrap our minds around that until we actually just experience our journey. So we go through cycles as we ascend, and I believe they start out small for both twins. And I think the intervals can be so small at first that they may not even be noticeable. The feminine is on more of a spiritually linked path, and the masculine is on more of a 3D or physically linked path. Those cycles quickly expand. So, as the spiritually focused experiencer, I went through extreme, what I consider to be more spiritually related growth. And soon after that, I started experiencing more physically related growth. But looking back, I can see that it wasn't as extensive as my spiritual growth. And keep in mind, this is just my experience, but I enjoy putting this all together. Like, coming into that understanding is so much fun to me. Okay, so as ascension continues, it's like a spiraling staircase that goes farther and farther outward as we ascend. So, some of the spiritual growth, like getting into meditation, opening to loving and authenticity, gaining knowledge. And I say knowledge, but it's not worldly knowledge, but spiritual downloads and other certain knowing and coming into greater awareness, opening to my purpose and to practicing in being in higher vibrations. But it was after some of that spiritual growth that I would experience moments of stillness. And the first time this happened, I heard my inner voice say, "You're both going to experience a timeout." And it was actually during the timeout that I believe he experienced physical growth, that worldly 3D growth. But it felt like little or nothing was happening for me because I was relating it to what I had gone through with my spiritual growth. And I just think that what they go through with their physical growth is totally different than the spiritual growth that the feminine goes through. But I remember the first time this happened, I really questioned things because the stillness just kind of freaked me out. So, as I'm able to look back at the messages I received along the way and put this together with my mind, with more understanding, and through my inner guidance and understanding of this, I wanted to ask, why would he be experiencing the larger part of his growth during our so-called timeouts? And the timeouts, as they felt to me, were when it felt like his physical energy was being pulled away. Even though I could still feel his presence of our shared soul energy, which is just to describe our shared soul, But also we have the energy of our physical bodies, the more dense energy that the soul emanates through. So we both experience our spiritual growth, but the masculine's is more through the subconscious mind at first and likely isn't as expansive, whereas the feminine's is mostly through the conscious mind and is more extreme. My journey has taught me that we can feel the physical energy through our shared chakra system. So we can send and receive sensations via the chakras. But the time out is actually a physical growth cycle where the masculine is being guided to bringing balance to their worldly interactions and to their mind, body, and emotions. That's the physical. But why the physical disconnect? There's one thing, raising our vibration during spiritual cycles can be exhausting and take time for our physical bodies to adjust. But also, I think this gives both a chance to let all that conscious thought really sink in without too much distraction from the subconscious. And I don't mean all the autonomous subconscious, but simply the mirrored aspects that come from your twin. And I talk about the conscious and subconscious here. And just to have further clarification on the spiritual and physical growth cycles, I wanted to draw what I was showing before. So this first block is the spiritual growth that the feminine experiences, and this is usually pretty expansive at first. And this is the spiritual growth of the masculine. Then this is the physical growth that the feminine experiences during the so-called time out. And this is the physical that the masculine experiences. And you can see that the top blocks are for the feminine and the bottom blocks are for the masculine, and the squiggly lines in the blocks are for the spiritual cycles, and then the open blocks are for the physical cycles. So then we get a little bit of a shorter cycle of spiritual growth for both and a little more of an increase of the physical for both. And you may go through lots of these cycles, but I believe the cycles of spiritual growth will be lengthy for both at first, but it's much more expansive for the feminine in turn and likely not as noticeable for the masculine. They may be getting a lot of dreams and signs, but it can take a while for it to actually surface to their conscious mind. And the physical are quick cycles for both, but this will be more of a subconscious level for the feminine and conscious for the masculine. For an example, they may intentionally be making changes or growing with things that are physically related, like, paying more attention to their health, stabilizing their ability to provide, breaking addictions. And they may not know exactly what's driving them to do this, but it comes from the motivation of the divine energy experienced at soul recognition that moved through activation and is now moving through the growth cycles, which is usually referred to as separation, but I don't refer to it as separation anymore, but bridging, and then it moves into balancing. But as we go through this, the spiritual cycles will gradually become shorter and the physical will become lengthier. The feminine will still feel more spiritually focused and the masculine more physically focused. And you can see how the later stages may even appear to mirror the earlier stages, and it evens out in the middle, which I believe when the cycles are evening out is when the masculine in turn has surrendered, and things may start happening on a conscious level for them. And this will vary, of course, from person to person. Like some people may have a lot of it happening consciously for them anyway. But I think that it typically is probably going to be more conscious for the feminine and more subconscious for the masculine in the beginning stages. Like they may even start connecting their desire to do these things to their desire for the FI. And for the feminine, they may have more subconscious things come through, like dreams and such. So during these moments of stillness, I was actually experiencing some physical ascension, even though I didn't notice it at the time. And it almost felt like he was gone because the physical energy was being pulled away. And I don't fully know why that is, but I can feel it's something I'm probably going to receive more with later on, because I usually get this stuff in what I call baby bites. But one thing I've gotten since this first happened is that it's pulled away to protect the feminine in turn. And I think that's probably to shield us from when they go deeper into the matrix, because in the early stages, they're likely still in running energy. Like they can still be experiencing their activation after the feminine is moving into their growth cycles. So going deeper into the matrix is actually like how some people say you have to hit rock bottom before you'll change. That's what going deeper into the matrix is like for the MI. And I want to say I think this is the design, like they're running hard and the matrix just opens wide to swallow them up. So, of course, with the masculine deeper in the matrix and the physical energy pulled away, it almost feels like they're not there. Because if the 3D energy wasn't pulled away, I think the feminine would probably suffer more of that activation energy. And even later, after the MI has moved on to their spiritual path, the FI is usually farther along in ascension. And I think this would just cause looping energy if this wasn't happening, where you're experiencing that same energy over and over without any expansion. And I think there are a lot of different scenarios that can happen at what I consider to be a very deterministic point during activation, such as I think the opposite can happen if the FI refuses to recognize imbalances during activation. And it can potentially cause them to be exposed to the toxic 3D energy coming from the MI. But I believe a lot goes down in the matrix during that time, but I'll have to save that for another video. But that stagnant feeling in my journey, I was intuitively assured that all this is actually an indication that he's moving along his path. Also, after those first few weeks of feeling stagnant, when it started coming in lengthier periods, as I was lying down to go to sleep one night, I heard my inner voice say, "Moments of stillness for you are moments of extreme growth for him." And that's when I really started putting together how the spiritual and physical aspects of growth are working together. And it's that boomerang effect that you put out, which is just the way the energy presents back to you. Like you first experience something, then it somehow shows up as having an effect on your twin as well. And this usually came in as signs for me, but then it comes back to you again. But this time you take it differently. Like it has the energy of your experience and the experience of your other self. Because even though we're one soul, our soul is experiencing through two bodies. It's carrying the energy of their physical experience as well. And that's why we're being guided to learn balancing, because we've got two physical experiences coming into this balance. And I believe that's one reason actually why twin flames are said to experience a fast-tracked ascension. But I didn't think I'd experienced much with 3D related growth, but then I realized a lot had happened since I met my twin. Some examples: before soul recognition, I went through my first ego check. I was out of work for a while and I wasn't doing things like going to the doctor or dentist regularly. But even after I got back to work, I still neglected to do those things for a little bit. But since I began my journey, I started going to the doctor and dentist regularly. I've done other preventative care like a colonoscopy, going to the gynecologist. I had a mammogram for the first time ever, and I even started sleeping with a CPAP machine, which has been super beneficial. And I didn't think about any of this until recently, but I realized I'd actually stopped a really big addictive behavior, which was gaming. I used to be big into gaming, and I lost complete interest in it once I was activated and went through the obsessiveness of that stage. After I moved on to my spiritual path, I did think about playing once in a while, but I didn't because I was more interested in things like meditation and focusing on some of my creative hobbies and interacting with people more and just getting out and going places. But without even trying, I didn't care about it anymore. And this was a pretty serious addiction for many years. I mean, I do play games, cards, video games, board games, and all that with my nieces and nephews sometimes, but I'm talking about holding up and spending entire weekends, sometimes just PC gaming and losing myself to it. And here's a little side thought and something maybe I'll find out about one day, but just think it's interesting. So my twin is 17 years younger than me, and I've always enjoyed all kinds of games, and I played some computer games here and there in my late 20s. But I didn't get addicted to it until the age of 32, which he would have been 15 at the time my addiction developed. And I was going through some serious imbalances at that time, which makes sense to me that I might mirror that addictive energy more easily. Because it was just a bit out of character for me because I was extremely active. I had farming land that I took care of by myself. I traveled frequently on top of working 40 plus hours each week. And I went to school full time during some of that time. But I remember when I got really into it because it was when what became my favorite game first came out. So the drawing I just did, much of that occurs during what is commonly referred to as separation. But again, I call it bridging, which is when we're strengthening our soul bridge. And then it turns to balancing, practicing balancing consistently. We're growing towards oneness, and it begins to feel really different from the early stages of the journey because it's a leveling out. And this is something that I've talked about in almost every post I've done because this is what I believe we're being guided to learn how to do, which is balancing. And not that we will always be balanced, but that we are practicing balancing. It's that we know when we're out of balance and how to get back to that balance. Now, about a year and 8 months after soul recognition, I'm experiencing what some may describe as detachment. And it is detachment in a sense, but it goes beyond that because I believe it's actually my twin's ascension, which is gradually aligning with my path of ascension because we're gradually aligning with our shared soul. And in doing this, our physical worlds become a part of that balance because ultimately that's what this journey is about. Learning to be our spiritual design within our physical manifestation. And of course, self-love is in that, but all of that is what we're being awakened to because many of us have detached from spiritual design through being too imbalanced towards our physical world or the matrix. That's the material possessions and our place in society, the conditioning. It's the importance of all that. It's operating mostly from our ego and not knowing how to listen to our heart. But our journey is guiding us back to that oneness of spiritual and physical because they work together as a whole, just like we are two physical bodies experiencing as a whole soul. And more, I'm experiencing what feels like detachment from my twin. It's that feeling of not really feeling him the same way as I did before. It's like I can feel him, but it's so subtle that I wondered if he was gone and I just made all this up. And briefly, I'll admit I did question things like I did in the beginning, but now I know better. And my inner guidance told me that he's experiencing a lot of growth right now. So intuitively, I understand this isn't detachment exactly, but oneness, and it's bringing our paths together. So when I got this most recent download, when I woke up, I had focused on feeling good before I opened my eyes. I lay there for about a minute and really focused on intending my vibration. And within the minute, my inner voice said, the closer we get to unity, the more we feel as one. Interestingly, as my other experiencer is balancing his world with our soul, it's probably felt like detachment from all that he used to know. Like his old ways of thinking, his old behaviors just don't serve him anymore. He may feel detached from friends, from the conditioning, out of place at his job, his lifestyle may not feel satisfying. And that doesn't mean he won't be interested in having nice things anymore or push for success or even have some of those friends still, but it's the energy that's coming to balance and all of that with our soul. As he's experiencing the so-called detachment, which it is detaching from some of it because he's balancing and some things won't work with that balance. Some things might, but it'll probably be experienced differently. And I'm experiencing more balancing in my physical world as well. And I think a part of that is that it can feel like detachment from my twin, but it's actually that balancing I've been practicing for more than a year now. And this might be when the FI really feels firm in their boundaries, which I think a lot of the boundaries that the FI sets for themselves are actually related to physical growth. And sometimes setting boundaries can feel like letting go of our twin or like we don't feel as strongly as we used to, but it's actually balancing. It's coming to soul alignment and it's a more balanced feeling towards them. So this feeling can be confusing at first, and why I wanted to talk about this because most people say it's inner union or they believe they're detaching, and it is detaching in a sense. But what I believe is actually happening is the MI is detaching from the matrix, their old ways, their conditioning, the physical gratifications they used to rely on don't define them anymore. And it's not that they won't be interested in all that, but it won't define them anymore. It becomes less and less important to them. And as the masculine in turn is letting go of their old self, the feminine is feeling that detachment as well. So it's not that we are detaching from our twin, but feeling the release of that dead and gone energy. And I say dead and gone because originally I wanted to say outdated energy, but I didn't like the sound of that. So I looked up some synonyms, and dead and gone was one of the recommendations. And I loved this because right before that first time out, I had gotten something through telepathy about changing. And I commented that that was the old me because I was going through a lot of changes. And my twin sang Dead and Gone by T.I. and Justin Timberlake. So that was one of the songs that I saved in my Soul's Journey playlist. But while all of this is happening, the MI is likely going through a lot of changes with their place in the world. And depending on their ego and circumstances, it could get worse before it gets better. And I'm sure this will be different for everyone. But again, this could be another reason why the FI feels more of a disconnection during the MI's conscious growth. But all of it, whether it gets worse before it gets better or not, or if they're gradually getting into their authenticity, it's them learning their balancing. And during this time, the FI is really standing firm in their boundaries because they've detached from that old energy too. And part of that energy could have been codependency, abandonment, anger, frustration, and it may seem like the FI doesn't feel the same way about the MI anymore, but it's just that they've let go of that attachment to the wounded energy. And what's left is divine energy, spiritual love. All those old wounded feminine and wounded masculine energies are moving out or are dead and gone. And divine energy is there in the balancing. And this is all about getting back to our heart through self-love. And we can find and define ourselves in that self-love rather than through conditioning. It's part of why when we've actually surrendered more and let go of expectations, we're living our life, enjoying life in more consistent alignment. That's why they tend to show up. However, I think it's beyond just a reunion when you're maintaining balance for the most part and you experience this shift in energy. The MI may show up not only because they feel you in higher vibrations, but because they're in tune with that too. Now, I'm not saying they'll show up and it'll be go time, but I believe we have the opportunity. And as I was writing that out, the word unity caught my attention within the word opportunity. But I believe we'll have the opportunity to build a relationship with each other through authenticity. And something I like to do, which I did in my video, Harmony of Divine Feminine and Divine Masculine Energies, in my From the Spark series, where I mentioned the nuances of self-love. And so when I come across one, I'll insert some of those nuances. So how I said we'll have the opportunity to build a relationship with each other through authenticity, I can instead say we'll have the opportunity to build a relationship with each other through self-love, through soul alignment, through our higher self, through spiritual love, through truth. These are all nuances of self-love. And it really shows how coming to self-love is coming to unity.